Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Button Pushers. I'm Meg,
I'm Ben.
and today we're going to talk about a little bit about digital because we know that digital is one topic that a lot of people kind of struggle with. And we're going to talk purely about histograms today. So let's get rolling on this. We do have a little presentation slide because I feel like this is a very a topic that you really need to view. We can't just talk about histograms because that would make no sense. But before we get rolling, we need to talk about why we even have histograms. And the reason why we have histograms is because digital went digital, right? So, what does digital mean? When we took actual x rays back in the day, when we had film, that was known as an analog picture. So, now we're taking digital pictures. All of our pictures are basically assigned values. We have exposure indexes, we have numbers assigned to all of our pixels and stuff. Where before, what you took is what you took. So when you took an x-ray of a chest x-ray, for example, you took everything that was there and it just became an x-ray. So if you were overexposed or underexposed, the image was going to be overexposed or underexposed. Now that we have digital, we can play with it. And if we're over or underexposed, then we can basically fix the image, right? So that is why we are sadly becoming known as button pushers, because we're starting to realize that technique isn't as quote unquote important as it used to be because the computer can fix all of our errors. So difference between analog and digital. So I have a couple pictures of railroad tracks here, right? So we have two different like parts to a railroad track. You have the long metal beam that goes on for freaking ever, right? And then you have the short little wooden planks that basically, they're the ties, they stop. They're what, 8 feet long or whatever they are. So analog is basically the long tracks going all the way down. They go on for infinity. That is your film chest x-ray. I cannot take a pinpoint on a, part of the lung and definitively define what color it is. But when I have a digital chest x-ray, now each of those points have an assigned value. So they have a stopping point. So they're like the short ties on the railroad track, the wooden planks. They have a stopping point. They're not going on forever. Let's talk about this another way.
Yeah, I think about old school clock versus like this awesome Casio watch that I wish I owned. So with analog, what we have is a continuous sample. We have a continuous signal that's constantly going on and on and on, just like the railroad track that Megan was talking about. So the second hand in this clock here, it continuously is moving, and the time is continuously being changed. It's always changing. With the Casio, with the digital system, it's changing incrementally. The word for it is it's a discrete spectrum, and so it means each little second represents a packet of time, almost like the crossbars or the tracks that the rails are running on. So this is 10:58 and 50 seconds, right? And that's a very precise time, but it doesn't have 10:58 and 50 seconds point one or point two or whatever, whereas the analog clock does kind of have that. Another way to maybe think about it would be like a trombone. Like the analog is that continuous kind of sound that a trombone can make, whereas digital is more like a piano. It has very specific notes that it can play, and it only recognizes those notes.
I like that. That's good. So I have another example here with analog versus digital, right? So let's say, you're an art fan, you go to the museum, right? And you look at a beautiful picture. There is no way for you to 100% replicate it. You can't look at it and look at, this red circle I have around a tree versus this blue circle and tell me the difference between those two shades of gray. I mean, to me, they look like the same shade of gray. So what I'm saying with that is like, I wouldn't be able to pick up a colored pencil and exactly replicate those shades of gray. However, if I'm digital and I now have assigned values to each of these shades of gray, Now I can actually completely replicate that exact same shade. So in this case, I have, I'm looking at this shade number 7, right? And I
Mhm.
can literally grab cool gray 7 from my colored pencils and exactly match it. So that's what digital is doing. It is assigning values to all of these shades, these IR exposures, and it's allowing us to now manipulate those shades, because if I want 7 to be brighter, I don't want just 7 to be brighter. I want the whole image to be brighter. It will move all of them in the same amount, rather than with film, we had no ways of altering our picture at all.
So, I mean, if I understand what you're saying correctly, like the x-rays, they pass through the patient and then they hit like a digital detector, and like this certain x-ray, when it hits the detector, it's assigning the number of x-rays that hit at that point some number value. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it for sure. Right. Instead of just being like, oh, here's, a chest x-ray, it's now assigning each little pixel a shade of gray, or black or white. And now
Mhm.
we're able to manipulate the entire image because we're now changing numbers.
That
Cool.
makes sense. Yeah.
So here's an exact example, right? We have an analog film chest x-ray, right? I took that. I didn't actually take that. Google took it. I took that picture and it was perfect and it was great, except there's no marker, but whatever. And then the second image is now digital. And this is a poorly described picture because there's no pixels or anything. It's got like 20 numbers on it and not
Mhm.
900 million. But the whole point being is now you can see shade 3 is being assigned the same shade 3 across like the entire lungs. Like it's all the lung space without the ribs in that area. So it's basically assigning that same color gray, the same number, and it's doing that across every single little pixel on that digital image.
So it's almost kind of like a spreadsheet or something where each color represents different numbers. Is that right?
Yes, yes, totally.
That's really
Great.
weird. Um, like one thing that I'm thinking about, like as you're saying that, is it means that unless I know what those numbers are, there's no way to look at that picture and say, oh, that's a good picture or that's a bad picture, right?
Yeah.
Because like if the numbers are really out of whack, the computer could control for that. Versus like the analog picture on the left, if it looks good, it looks good, period. End of story. If it looks garbage, it looks garbage. There's nothing I can
Mm-hmm.
do about that except for
Mm-hmm.
shoot it again. But like
Yeah.
the digital one, since it's numbers in a computer, the computer could change the numbers and make it look good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and fix it, right? Plus, you're
Huh.
100% right. If we didn't have processing going on that computer, we'd be looking at a whole bunch of values, and that's when you get into like the spatial frequency versus spatial domain stuff, and that's way past today's lecture. But basically, yeah, if we don't have the ability to view all of this binary information that the computer is doing, we would be looking at numbers, and we wouldn't be looking at a beautiful chest X-ray with 20 digits on it right now.
Hmm.
Cool. So this is what brings us to histograms, right? So histograms are basically taking all of those values and counting them. So the x-axis is representing the actual shades of gray, if you will. So the all the way to the left is the white part. So that's like your bone, anything that's stopping all of that x-ray. All the way to the right is the black. And then all the shades of gray are in the middle. So this picture right here doesn't look like it has a lot of these shades of gray. It kind of goes from white to a light white, light gray, and then it kind of goes into that black, and that's about it. So I don't know what we're looking at, kind of an x-ray of that, but it's mostly bone. That's what it is. Then the y-axis is representing all of the frequency, the number of pixels that we have in the entire image of that number. And as you can see, this is going up to 3,000. There are thousands and thousands of pixels on an image receptor. So it's counting every single one of those that absorbed pixel intensity of 50, and it counted them all up and it created a bar graph. Sometimes you'll see this bar graph as more of like a smooth line and it won't have all these individual lines. And all they did was just connect the peaks and the valleys. But
So
that's
it's not
how.
telling us, where those pixels are. Like it's not telling us where on the
True.
image receptor that value was received. It's just saying this is how many
Uh,
on the image receptor received this value.
right. 100%. And like you and I, like we just said, like I can't look at this histogram and figure out what I'm looking at. All I can tell is that there's a lot of lighter shades and darker shades, but there's not really much in the middle. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know if this is, it's definitely not an abdomen, but I don't know what the X-ray is of this histogram. I don't know about you, but I can't look at histograms and just be like, that's what that is.
No, that's not how my mind works.
Uh-huh. Okay, so then what the computer does is it compares that histogram that you just took to an expected histogram. And how it receives an expected histogram is basically it averages 50 of the most similar comparison exams that have been taken. So mind you, the 50, it's not like it takes 50 and it just stops, right? And it uses those 50 for the rest of the tube's life. It'll continue to re-average like 50 more recent average normal pictures and create an average histogram. So as your tube gets older, it's going to be kind of compensating for that. And it's also going to be using an average of 50 because let's say this person, like I'm doing a chest x-ray and they have some barium left over, like they did a swallow study and, barium stuck or something. All of that barium is white. That's going to cause a huge spike at the beginning of the histogram. So by being able to compare it to an average picture, it's kind of creating more of what it should look like because it knows it shouldn't have that barium in there normally. So then what the computer does is it takes that histogram that you took and it kind of shifts the histogram that you took based on where the averages are. So again, I have some pictures of digital versus analog and, well, film, I should say. So the bottom picture is film. And we all know if you were a film tech, you know that you had to be dead on with your techniques. I don't know who the heck would use 24 mass on a chest x-ray, but this picture is showing 24 mass and it is severely burned out. Like there is nothing you can see on there. There's nothing you can do to fix that. The radiologist is going to be screaming in your ear. You cannot even hold that to a hot lamp and be able to see an image. With digital, I have 3 pictures here, one being underpenetrated, one being overpenetrated. You can see based on where this histogram is sitting in the middle of the chart. A is a little underpenetrated, C is a little overpenetrated. And the computer technically shifts it and kind of corrects the histogram so that it looks the way it should look and processes it now to look like the average 50 histograms.
So all the pictures look the same, even though different techniques were used.
Yes, exactly. Where with film, different techniques, totally different pictures.
What's that little red S? What's that little red S there? Do you know?
So the H&D curve kind of a thing, the exposure latitude, dynamic range.
What's it doing?
So that's basically telling you where it's processing the main part of the information. So the area to the bottom is going to be the toe. The area at the top is the shoulder. Those are the areas that are no good. And if I didn't shift where this processing, this histogram, it would have appeared as under or over penetrated. So it's basically putting it in that dynamic range of that range that it wants to see the right shades.
Cool. Yeah. So that's kind of how it's analyzing the picture. Is it's saying, here's where the histogram is, and I'm going to put that red S there rather than have that red S somewhere else. It's almost like the way
off-centered. Yeah.
Cool.
It's correcting it, right? Sounds great in theory, but we don't want to become button pushers, right? We don't want to be dependent on the computer to fix all of our technique errors. That's like the worst.
I'm thinking about, like, I've got this new car, right? And it's great. I love it. But like, if I have it in cruise control, if someone slows down or brakes ahead of me, the car will like overly brake. Like it goes crazy with the brake, like, because it's got some kind of automatic sensor in the cruise control. And so what I've had to start to do is like outguess the computer. And like I turn off the cruise control when it's not being helpful, or I'll just cancel it. And then because I know the car is going to turn off to the right or whatever, and I'm not going to hit the back of the car. So the computer doesn't know that, but it's there to help. But at the same time, like I can't just like blindly expect the car to drive me everywhere I want to go. Like I have to kind of partner with it, I guess.
Yeah, someday.
Yeah, someday
soon,
maybe.
I'm sure.
But yeah, as an X-ray tech, like you can't just like blindly be like, oh, that picture looks great. Move on, right? Because the computer's doing something in the background. It's analyzing these histograms and moving stuff around that I don't see. And so like I kind of need to know what it's doing to like turn off the cruise control, so to speak, from time to time.
Do it correctly. Yeah. And that's we just talked a couple episodes ago about exposure index versus deviation index. And that's basically, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to that one, check that one out, because that kind of goes into why we don't want to just blindly be pressing the button and just calling it a day. So now let's talk about what that computer does with that histogram. So with the histogram, we're looking for a value of interest, the VOI. And what that is that's basically the bulk of the anatomy. Because keep in mind, those image receptors are going to be receiving a lot more information than just the anatomy of interest. So it's going to be receiving areas like the collimated borders. Have you ever taken an X-ray and seen the collimated borders on your image?
Yes.
Like that's basically, that's the area to the left of the VOI, which is known as the S-min. And that's like very white areas. And it's not part of the X-ray. It's not like we look at a chest X-ray and we're looking for those white borders, right? But it's on the image. And so therefore it's like densities on that image that need to be processed in the histogram. So that's the area all the way to the left of the value of interest. So on this X-ray over here, or this histogram over here, you'll see the VOI, and then just a little bit of the section at the very front, which is past that S-min, minimum value. And that's like collimation borders. If a person has a metallic implant, you would imagine it would have a huge spike here, right? And the computer would be like, oh, there's something wrong here, cut that off. And say, we don't want this huge white spike of a metallic implant or barium even, because that's not normal in this X-ray. And it will actually shift where it's starting to process the information for the chest X-ray or whatever X-ray we're taking.
That's cool. While you're saying that, I was thinking about the problems I'm having with my camera right now on my computer, how it's making me look so white and crazy. But like, I found this weird thing, like, so you're saying like it could add like a border like that, right? Like this ridiculous border, and then it could change things. Like, so it could add the border and then change things, and then
I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, and then change stuff, like according to like how it's identifying those borders, right? It could change things accordingly.
Awesome. I loved your little demonstration there. That was great. Yeah, that really does change how it processes all the values of interest, the pixels. Yeah.
I still can't get Zoom to fix. I look like I feel like I'm like Hamlet's father's ghost right now, is what I feel like. Like the ghost of a king from Denmark. But that makes sense. Like, so with the X-rays, it could do the same thing. It could say, oh, this junk over here. Let me see if I can do a quick annotation. Where's my annotation thing? This peak at 2817 on the far right, that's useless information. We don't want that. So I'm going to collimate. I'm going to kind of cut that stuff off and only process the rest.
Which actually, great point. So that part all the way to the right, that's past the S maximum value. That's also known as the tail. That's like all of that black space that's in every single X-ray like ever. Even on this chest X-ray that's on here, you see that black space above the shoulders, right? Like that's normal, but we don't want that processed in our image, or else now we're going to be like looking at all this extra black densities and it's going to try to make sense of it. And it'll change all of the shades of gray that are in there. So it's recognizing these areas past the S minimum and maximum, but it's cutting them off and not processing them in the histogram when it assigns the lookup table and our shades of gray and all of that.
That's really cool. So we can select what pixels we want to process, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah. All of them are on there. We just don't necessarily need to see all of them when we compare our shades of gray and stuff.
Yeah, it's like more information than like we needed. So the computer's going to select for what's best. Like I was reading this article, and I didn't get all of it, but it was talking about dark field radiography. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of a new technology, but it's based on the same stuff. It's just changing how it's selecting what pixels to process, and it's processing them based on the possibility of them being Compton scatter. So I remember as in image production, we always teach like Compton scatter bad. And dark field radiography is actually using Compton scatter to better evaluate things like lung tissue that are not high attenuators. But it's just doing exactly what you're talking about, Meg. Like it's selecting for certain pixel values that would be associated with Compton scatter. So then it could possibly find information at 2817. That's interesting. That's cool.
That's very cool. Yeah. So I have an example picture here for you. How many times have you guys gone to take like a chest x-ray up in the NICU and you see the whole outline of the baby basically, right? From that off-focus radiation. That's another topic, another day. But you'll see that like the computer sees all of this information, and then you have to drag your collimation borders, and then it suddenly makes the chest x-ray pop, right? You're literally removing all of this area before the S minimum, and you're changing where the value of interest is on that histogram. That's why before the x-ray looks really crummy and gray, and then you move your collimated borders, you remove all of this, off-focus radiation, all of these white shades that are being processed in your histogram, and boom, the chest x-ray pops, and you're like, oh, thank God I don't have to go do a repeat. NICU repeats are the absolute worst, right? And then you'll see the area above the chest being represented above the S maximum, all that way to the right. So and then the main chest is like that main area.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this. So it's saying, I think I can draw now. This area right from here to here is only what that's the stuff that's only interesting, right?
Yep.
All this other stuff, get rid of it. We don't want it, right? And then after it's done that, then it puts the funny S-shaped curve in here. Is that right?
Yep. Nailed it.
But it's all based on what it decided was important. So if it thought all of this was important, like it's going to give me an S curve that goes through all of this, and it's not necessarily going to be very helpful picture. It's going to look like this picture here.
Yep.
So not very high contrast versus if I redefine this is all I want right here. Oh my goodness, I can't draw very good. So it says that's there, and then it gives me a nice contrast. Oh my Lord, I can't draw. But it basically increases the steepness of this curve and gives me more contrast, if I'm understanding it right.
100%.
That's really interesting.
I'm glad you found those little tools, because I wouldn't have to do that. Make a good team. Okay, so I'm going to test you, Ben. Which of the following exams would have the smallest histogram tail?
I think I'm totally going to miss this.
No pressure. It's okay. We can just cut it out if you get it wrong and redo it.
No, that's fine. That's fine. The smallest histogram tail.
A knee, a hand, an abdomen, or a shoulder? Think about what makes up the tail.
I'm going to guess an abdomen.
That is correct. Yes.
I don't know if I knew the answer or if there was some test wiseness there. Because I looked at these options. It's like the one that's not like the others is the abdomen. Right?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, the rest of them are all extremities. Yeah. But
so why is it the abdomen?
Because think about, let's go back to that last slide, right? So the abdomen is going to take up almost the entire picture, right? So if I have this entire picture being filled with the actual region of interest, the abdomen, I'm not going to have this tail. The tail is the black areas that are, just like straight radiation. It hasn't gone through a single thing. It hasn't been penetrated by, or it hasn't been absorbed by anything. So that dead area on the sides. And with an abdomen, most of the time we have an abdomen, it fills up the entire 14 by 17, right? Where a hand, what were the other ones? A hand, a knee, a shoulder, those all have black areas going around those areas of interest. So they're going to have a larger histogram tail on there that the computer is going to have to cut off so it doesn't process it and it allows it to have high contrast.
That totally makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. Because like, oh my goodness, I got to draw this too. Because like, where's my little drawing tools? So like what you're saying, this is gonna be terrible too. Like the hand, I'm gonna draw a Mickey Mouse's hand, right? The hand has all this black space out here, right? And so that's making a fat tail, right? Mm-hmm. Or like, especially like if I think about like a lateral knee, right? Lateral knee, you got all this black space out here, right? And it's this is terrible, but it's showing up on the histogram. Like the computer's saying, oh, this must be useful information out here. But really it's not useful information. It's just that tail. It's the tail of the histogram, and it's a big one.
Did I get that right? Do a shoulder?
The shoulder, I feel like the shoulder would be the least likely one to cause problems, right? Because it's, you just got a little bit of black space out here, hopefully. Unless, you don't know how to column it, right? Which that's a different problem. So abdomens make sense.
Okay, good. Obviously, we're talking about like a normal abdomen, not like a peed abdomen where.
Right. Yeah. Or like, exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about that too.
Yeah.
Well, that was super helpful. So that's basically why we need to know about histograms. And I can see too, where if I knew more about histograms, it might make me better at like Snapchat or Zoom and figuring out like how to take pictures of people with my phone and stuff like that.
Right.
Because it's the same thing, right? Like my phone, the reason like I can make my phone pictures look different is they're digital images and I can mess with them and choose for things.
Yep. Cool. All those filters. Cool. Yeah.
So when are we going to get an X-ray machine that's just the size of my smartphone? That's what I want.
Oh, that's fair, right? Well, maybe like when they start doing the cold cathode that we were kind of talking about.
Yeah, you're talking. That's true. Yeah, if you had a cold cathode, you could. Yeah. Cold cathode, dark field X-rays. That's what I want to be, a dark
field X-ray. Common, right? Let's let's stop worrying about the shielding and realizing there's much bigger things that are coming.
Yeah, because you can see where like, and I guess this goes to that point of like, we don't necessarily need to know how the X-ray circuit works, but we do need to know more about like how these computers and stuff are, what they're doing.
Totally, right. More than just a couple weeks in your, digital class. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, Meg. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that's it for today. And we can kind of dive into some more digital topics another day. So.
Yes. Well, thank you again, and we'll be back with more digital stuff in the future.
Bye.
Bye.